Here's what you're missing over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we are talking about medicine, science, and making race in the Civil War. That's a book out by Leslie A. Schwalm. And Leslie is an emerita professor of history at the University of Iowa. Her previous books include Emancipation's Diaspora, Race, and Reconstruction in the Upper Midwest. And Leslie, welcome to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for inviting me to talk on your show today.
Absolutely. It's always nice to have somebody on who has written a book that's interesting about a subject that we don't always, up until recently, we haven't really been exploring, I think, at least on a popular history level. And I'm seeing more and more stories or books like this, or not like this particularly, but on the subject of African-American history, especially during the Civil War. I just actually bought like 5 books on the 54th Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago. So,
right.
Yeah. So what is it that made you decide that you wanted to tackle this subject, and how did you get into it?
A couple of things kind of pulled me into the topic. When I was working on my earlier book on emancipation in the Upper Midwest, I came across some records of some pretty horrific medical treatment of the soldiers in Iowa's Black Regiment, the 60th U.S. Colored Infantry. So that sort of stuck with me for a while. And then I was also drawn by a big question, which is a question about how and why anti-Black racism survives and thrives even after destruction of slavery. We know that anti-Black racism is born out of a need to rationalize slavery. So once slavery is destroyed, once it's no longer legal, what is keeping anti-Black racism so central in American society and culture?
What do you think?
I thought, let's look at medicine and science during the war and see how they play a role in sustaining racism.
What's interesting is, as I was reading through it, so it's funny because I spend so much time, studying the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War that I've trained myself to learn the Victorian way of speaking. And as I was reading the book, there's modern terminology for different things that I was like, man, I'm not even aware of half of the things that go on in our own society today. I'm so much in 1863 that I haven't even learned the new language when dealing with race and things. And it was interesting. Like, there were a couple of sentences I had to read a couple of times because I'm like, man, I felt like I've been in a different time, and then a time machine took me into 2023. But what do you think is the answer to? I know that was completely disjointed. That has nothing to do with what I'm asking you right now. But what do you think the answer to your question is about why it persisted after the end of slavery? I mean, there's got to be more than one answer to that because it's such a complicated thing, right?
Yes, of course there is. But what I did find is that somewhat ironically, with the enlistment of nearly 200,000 Black soldiers during the war, and with some 500,000 people fleeing slavery and approaching Union lines, white Unionists had contact with, and in some ways access to, African Americans and African American bodies in very large numbers for the first time. And what happens during the war is that white Unionists medical practitioners and scientists took advantage of that opportunity to further their belief that race is a biological thing that can be measured and cataloged and described. In doing that work of investigating race in Black bodies, these same white medical practitioners and scientists claim for themselves a new kind of authority as masters of race knowledge. So it benefited them. It benefited their professional standing. They did investigations, published articles, published books, published pamphlets, and in that way gained prestige in the medical profession on the basis of their investigations of Black bodies during the Civil War.
So it sounds like I'm sure racism is at the heart of what they did and how they did it and why they did it and all that. But it also sounds like a lack of what we know as the scientific method today. You know what I mean? Like it's weird. I couldn't. It reminds me a lot of actually the way the Nazis used eugenics and that whole thing over there. Like it's junk science, right?
Well, I would actually beg to differ with you on that, Matt, because race continues to play a pretty central factor in several aspects of healthcare and medical science today, in ways that are still both unethical and we might regard as contrary to scientific method. We know that Black maternal and infant mortality rates are much higher than the same rates among whites. We know that people who research and publish in the field of genetics continue to use the term race without defining it. So I would be very hesitant to say, oh, this is just bad science from the 19th century. It was the best and, in fact, the cutting edge of scientific method to do the things that these surgeons and investigators were doing in the 19th century. And quite horribly, it feeds into a pattern that continues well into the 20th century. Some of the investigations that I document in this book, we see very similar kinds of investigations in World War I and World War II on soldiers of color. So it's not something that was unusual and limited to the mid-19th century.
Good point. I stand corrected on that. Okay, so there were a couple of guys that we talked about in chapter 3. Actually, I think there were 3 guys. Major T.B. Brooks. Who is he, and what did he do?
He is the commander over engineering troops, and he's one of the very first white officers in the Union Army that I find being interested in the idea of race and the idea of are Black laborers and Black soldiers equal to white soldiers in terms of their capacity. And so he sends out a survey. So, very much like a sociologist today would send out a survey. He sends out a survey and he asks other commanders of engineering troops what their experience and what their observations have been of Black soldiers who are used to build fortifications. Of course, they're essential to the construction of fortifications in the South. So he asked these white commanders, what are your assessments of Black people's capacities? And asking that question, and in turn with the people who responded, they're clearly taking on a sense of authority, a sense of, I am a qualified observer. And so, in essence, what Brooks does is he makes race a question worth investigating, with the premise that it's worth investigating because black troops are not the equal of white troops.
Okay, I gotcha.
And indeed, that is what everyone responds. Basically, that black men are like animals, and they can work hard because they're like animals, but they would never be the equal of white troops.
Yeah, there's a lot of language in here where they refer to them in animalistic ways.
Indeed.
I forget who it was, but one of them compares white men and black men to horses and oxen.
Exactly. At a time, of course, when most Americans had very close relationships with horses and recognized their intelligence and viewed oxen as beasts of burden.
Right. And there's, let's see here, there's a quote later on in the book we're talking about, I'm sorry, we're on Brooks here. Neither Brooks nor any of the officers who responded to his queries noted the human cost of the labor performed by African-American soldiers who worked on entrenchments and forts. A medical inspector reported that same month that the soldiers who performed this labor did so while being shelled. The wounds produced were so terrible that half of the injured would perish. The inspector also regretted that, quote, the bones are so shattered, end quote, that he could not prepare specimens to forward to the Army Medical Museum. More on this in chapter 4. So it's kind of ghoulish the way they did fit like medical experiments on the cadavers of black men. Did they do? I would assume they did them while they were alive as well, right?
I wouldn't say experiments. We do know that particularly enslaved people were frequently used by physicians before the Civil War for surgical and medical experimentation. It's not that that didn't exist, but mostly what we see is an interest in black bodies that extended from the living to the dead. And the thing to remember about autopsy and dissection in the 19th century is that, on one hand, it was the mark of the most advanced medical knowledge to have conducted autopsies and to have participated in dissections. But on the other hand, it was very difficult to secure cadavers. Medical schools were always having trouble getting cadavers, and oftentimes relied on an illegal trade in essence, what was grave robbing, as well as relying on purchasing the cadavers of the enslaved dead for medical school. So the war changes that dramatically. Now, all of a sudden, medical practitioners in the Army have access to an abundance of human remains. And as it turns out, many white military surgeons conducted dissections on African-American bodies. As I explain in the book, there would have been a great deal of anger among white troops had this been done focusing on white soldiers. And
right.
It would have met popular condemnation. But these same white physicians felt entirely comfortable exploiting the human remains of African Americans, knowing that they wouldn't be criticized by the white public. They might be criticized by the black public, and they were criticized by the black public, but there was no power behind that criticism when it came from the black community.
So it sounds to me, so you were saying before, if this stuff was used to justify slavery, then why didn't it end with slavery? And I mean, to me, the obvious thing is, well, just because slavery ended, that generation of whites still grew up with that way of thinking. So,
oh yes,
right,
and it, let's be very clear that the North was rigidly segregated.
Yes.
And northern states had an abundance of laws restricting the rights and opportunities.
Listen to the rest of this interview and dozens like it. Support the show and get early access to special episodes, early and discounted ticket sales, and more. The second lieutenant level and above gets access to all monthly Patreon episodes. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, choose a tier, and join. And I thank you in advance.